I planned a surprise birthday party for my husband. I came home early, and I heard all the conversation he was having with his friends. I thought the worst surprise that night would be ruining my husband's birthday plans. I had no idea that the real surprise was waiting for me inside my own house, already unfolding without me. For years, I believed trust was built quietly, shared responsibilities, and the simple assumption that the person you married would never deliberately destroy you. That illusion shattered the moment I stood in my hallway, shoes still on, purse sliding off my shoulder, listening to my husband's voice float casually through the living room. I wasn't eavesdropping out of suspicion. I wasn't hiding. I had come home early because life interrupted my plans. What I heard wasn't whispered, wasn't secretive, and wasn't accidental. It was laughter. It was confidence. It was betrayal spoken so comfortably that it made me realize this wasn't a mistake. This was a lifestyle I had never been invited into. And in that moment, before I ever confronted him, before I ever pressed record, before I ever locked the door, I understood something devastatingly clear. The surprise wasn't what I planned for him. It was what he had been planning behind my back for years. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 36 years old, and I've lived in New York City my entire life. I grew up in Queens, married my college sweetheart, and eventually settled into a Brooklyn brownstone that felt like proof we had made it. My husband, Daniel Carter, is 38. To everyone who knows him, he's dependable, charming in a quiet way, and deeply involved with his family. He works long hours in logistics management, often leaving early in the morning and coming home after the kids are asleep. We have 2 children under 10, and like most parents in the city, our lives revolve around school schedules, packed lunches, and constantly negotiating time. Our marriage wasn't dramatic. It wasn't passionate in the way movies portray love, but it was steady. We argued about bills, about time, about exhaustion. We apologized. We moved on. Daniel was never the type to raise his voice or storm out. That's why I trusted him. I never questioned the late nights or the occasional phone call he took in another room. I told myself we were just in a demanding phase of life. I believed maturity meant stability, and stability meant silence. Looking back, I realize how much I mistook absence for loyalty. Daniel's birthday was coming up on a Saturday, and I wanted to do something meaningful, something that reminded him he was still seen and appreciated despite how busy life had become. I planned a surprise party weeks in advance, coordinating quietly with his closest friends and a few family members. I booked a private room at a small lounge in Williamsburg, ordered his favorite cake, and arranged childcare so we could stay out late without worrying about the kids. His best friend, Anthony Russo, was especially helpful. He reassured me that Daniel would be thrilled and mentioned that Daniel had been under a lot of stress lately. Hearing that made me feel even more determined to give him something joyful. I told Daniel I had work commitments the night before his birthday and might stay with my sister to help her prepare for an early morning appointment. It wasn't unusual for us to spend nights apart due to logistics, so he didn't question it. He kissed me distractedly, reminded me to drive safe, and went back to scrolling on his phone. I remember feeling proud of how smoothly everything was coming together. Late that evening, my sister called to tell me her plans had fallen through and she wouldn't need my help after all. With the kids already asleep at home and no reason to stay away, I decided to drive back earlier than expected. I didn't text Daniel because I wanted to surprise him with a quiet night together. When I pulled into our driveway, the house lights were on, brighter than usual for that hour. I noticed unfamiliar cars parked nearby, but assumed they belonged to neighbors or friends stopping by briefly. I let myself in quietly, careful not to wake the kids. As soon as I stepped inside, I heard multiple male voices coming from the living room. Daniel hadn't mentioned having anyone over, but I still didn't feel alarmed. He often invited friends over spontaneously. What stopped me in my tracks wasn't the presence of guests, it was the sound playing on the television. I recognized it instantly. The music, the echo of a large hall, my own voice laughing. It was our wedding video. My first instinct was confusion, followed by a strange tightening in my chest that I couldn't explain. I stood still, halfway between the front door and the hallway, listening. The living room lights were dimmed, and the television cast flickering shadows down the hallway. I could hear the clink of beer bottles and the shuffle of bodies shifting on the couch. The wedding video continued playing, scenes from our reception filling the room with memories I thought were sacred. Daniel's voice came through clearly, nostalgic but casual, as if he were commenting on a random clip rather than the beginning of our marriage. He joked about how young we looked, how much had changed since then. His friends laughed, making remarks about how time flies and how marriage ages people. I waited for discomfort to set in, for someone to acknowledge that this was an odd thing to watch without me. Instead, the tone shifted. Daniel paused the video at a moment from the reception, and that's when I heard him say her name. Lisa, my best friend, my maid of honor. My stomach dropped so suddenly it felt physical, like I had missed a step on a staircase. The room went quiet for a brief second, long enough for me to hope I had misheard him. Then the laughter returned, louder than before, erasing any doubt that this was a shared memory among them. Daniel spoke with the ease of someone telling a story he had told many times before. He reminded them of the moment during the reception when he kissed Lisa, framing it as a joke, something reckless and exciting. Anthony laughed and added commentary, saying I never suspected a thing because I was busy managing the kids and greeting relatives. Another voice agreed, saying I had always been too trusting. Daniel didn't correct them. He leaned into it, calling me naive, explaining that what started that night didn't end there. He admitted, without hesitation, that the affair lasted 2 years. 2 years of lies layered over our daily life. He mentioned that it only stopped after an incident involving him, Lisa, and her husband that resulted in police involvement, something I had never known about because he had carefully hidden it. The men laughed again, raising their bottles in mock celebration of bad decisions. I stood frozen, absorbing every word, not because I wanted to, but because my body refused to move. In that moment, there was no confusion left to resolve. Everything I was hearing connected seamlessly, painfully, and completely. The surprise party, the late nights, the secrecy, the emotional distance, it all aligned into a single, horrifying truth. I stayed where I was, pressed against the wall just outside the living room, my breath shallow and controlled in a way I didn't know I was capable of. My hands were trembling, but my mind felt unnaturally sharp. Every instinct told me to walk away, to leave before they noticed me, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. Instead, I pulled my phone from my bag and opened the camera, angling it toward the floor so the screen wouldn't glow. I didn't need video, I needed their voices. I needed proof that what I was hearing wasn't something my mind would later soften or excuse. I hit record and let it run. Inside the room, the conversation continued, unfiltered and careless. Daniel talked about logistics, about how hard it had been to juggle schedules, about how easy it was because no one ever suspected him. Anthony joked that the house itself had probably seen worse. They laughed again, and each laugh felt heavier than the last, settling into me like something permanent. Outside, the night air hit me hard, sharp and cold compared to the warmth inside the house. I sat in my car with the engine off, phone still recording, until the voices faded into nothing but background noise. When I finally stopped it, the silence felt loud. I stared at the steering wheel, trying to slow my breathing, trying to understand how easily my life had split into a before and an after. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just sat there, replaying pieces of the conversation in my head, realizing how deliberate everything had been. This wasn't a confession that slipped out under pressure. This was a performance they were comfortable repeating. After a few minutes, I turned the engine on and drove around the block, not because I had anywhere to go, but because I needed movement to keep myself grounded. By the time I parked again, I knew I wasn't leaving the situation unresolved. I wasn't going to confront him emotionally or demand explanations I already had. I was going to end the illusion on my terms. When I returned, the front door opened before I reached it. Daniel stepped out, still laughing, holding his phone, clearly assuming he was alone. He froze when he saw me standing there. The laughter drained from his face so quickly it was almost impressive. I didn't say anything as I walked past him and into the house. I could feel his confusion behind me, the way he tried to speak and failed to form a sentence. Once inside, I turned the lock, then the deadbolt, then slid the chain into place. Only then did I look at him through the glass. He knocked once, lightly at first, like this was a misunderstanding that could be fixed with a calm conversation. When I didn't respond, the knocking became urgent. He asked what was wrong, why I was home, why I was acting like this. I still said nothing. Outside, his friends shifted uncomfortably, realizing something had gone very wrong. That was when his phone started buzzing. I knew exactly who it would be before I saw the name light up on my own screen moments later. His mother had been looped in quickly, probably by Anthony, who had always believed that parents were the fastest way to manage a situation. The message wasn't accusatory or curious, it was corrective. She told me marriages have rough patches, that men make mistakes, that I shouldn't overreact to something I didn't fully understand. She framed it as concern, but it was clear she assumed I had discovered something and was preparing to leave. The fact that she jumped straight to damage control told me this wasn't the first time she had been asked to smooth things over for him. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her message didn't change anything. It only confirmed how deeply protected his behavior had always been. Outside, Daniel's voice rose, panic seeping in where confidence had been minutes earlier. He begged me to open the door, insisted it was a joke taken out of context, that his friends exaggerated things. When that didn't work, he shifted tactics, reminding me of the kids, of our history, of how late it was, and how the neighbors were starting to notice. He was right about that. Curtains across the street moved, phones came out, someone started recording. The humiliation he suddenly feared was the same humiliation he had laughed about inflicting on me. He promised explanations, apologies, therapy, anything that would get him back inside. I listened without responding, not because I was unsure, but because there was nothing left to say. Everything he could offer now came too late, filtered through exposure instead of honesty. Eventually, the situation escalated beyond him. A neighbor called the police, concerned about the noise and the scene unfolding on the sidewalk. When the lights appeared at the end of the street, Daniel's voice broke completely. He begged again, this time not as a husband, but as someone realizing consequences had finally arrived. I watched from inside as he was asked to step away from the door, still barefoot, still trying to explain himself to anyone who would listen. Anthony and the others disappeared quickly, leaving him alone with the reality he had created. When the street finally quieted and the house fell still, I leaned against the door and closed my eyes. The birthday decorations sat untouched in my trunk. The surprise was over. And for the first time since I had walked into that house, the silence felt honest. The moment the police lights washed over the front of the house, everything Daniel had tried to control slipped completely out of his hands. Neighbors who had been pretending not to watch stepped closer, phones raised openly now, no longer discreet. Daniel stood on the driveway in his boxers, arms half raised, speaking too fast, his words tumbling over each other as he tried to explain a situation that no longer belonged to him. He kept glancing toward the door, toward me, as if eye contact alone might save him. It didn't. The officers asked him to lower his voice, to step back, to explain why he was causing a disturbance. Each instruction stripped away another layer of dignity. He tried to laugh it off, to say it was a misunderstanding between husband and wife, but the desperation in his tone betrayed him. When the officers finally separated him from the door, the street fell into an uneasy quiet broken only by the crackle of the radio and the low murmur of curious neighbors. Daniel kept looking back at the house, his face red, his posture collapsing inward as reality settled in. He wasn't being arrested this time, but he was being escorted away from the situation he had created. That distinction didn't matter to him. What mattered was that he wasn't coming back inside. As the police car pulled away and the last of the onlookers drifted back into their homes, the silence that followed felt heavy, almost sacred. Inside, the house was exactly as it had been before I arrived. Lights on, furniture untouched, the faint smell of beer lingering in the air. The normalcy of it all was unsettling. I walked through each room slowly, turning off lights, locking windows, reclaiming space that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Morning arrived without ceremony. The kids woke up asking about their dad, unaware that anything had changed. I made breakfast, packed lunches, and answered their questions with calm half-truths, explaining that plans had shifted and that today would be a quiet day. In the trunk of my car, the birthday decorations sat exactly where I had placed them days earlier. Balloons, wrapped gifts, a cake receipt folded neatly in an envelope. I didn't move them. I didn't cancel the reservations right away either. I let the unused plans exist for a few hours longer, not out of hope, but because acknowledging their end felt final. Eventually, I sent brief messages to everyone involved, telling them the event was canceled and thanking them for understanding. No explanations, no drama, just a clean line drawn through what would never happen. By midday, my phone was full again. Apologies from Daniel, messages from his mother urging forgiveness, even a few texts from people who had clearly only heard parts of the story and wanted to help smooth things over. I listened to one voicemail from Daniel, just one. His voice sounded smaller, rehearsed, already shifting blame toward stress, confusion, and poor judgment. I didn't respond. Instead, I contacted a lawyer and scheduled a consultation. That single action brought more clarity than any conversation could have. It wasn't fueled by anger or revenge. It was fueled by certainty. The recording on my phone wasn't leverage or insurance. It was closure. I didn't need him to admit anything else. I had already heard the truth when he thought I wasn't listening. That evening, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone in the living room and finally allowed myself to feel the weight of what had happened. Not grief for the marriage I was ending, but relief that I no longer had to question my reality. I sent one final message to Daniel, short and factual, telling him communication would go through legal channels from now on. Then I turned my phone face down. I didn't cry for what I lost. I cried for how long I had carried something that was never mine to fix. Some endings don't come with closure conversations or mutual understanding. Some endings arrive when you stop pretending not to hear what's being said right in front of you. I didn't ruin his birthday. I didn't create a scene. I simply refused to protect a lie that everyone else seemed comfortable laughing about. If you enjoyed this story, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more real stories like this.